The wind screamed through the endless pines, a hollow, unearthly sound that felt less like weather and more like a warning. Elias Morgan pulled his fur-lined coat tighter against his body, but no layer could keep out the cold here. The snow was deep, swallowing his boots with every step, and the forest of northern Canada seemed to stretch on forever. Each tree stood like a black pillar against the pale moonlight, their skeletal branches weighed down with ice. Earlier that day, Elias had passed through a small, forgotten logging town. The streets were nearly empty, and the few people he saw spoke to him only in hurried whispers. At the local bar, an old man with a face like weathered leather had given him a stare that felt heavier than the air outside. "Don't wander too far," the man had said, his voice low. "The Wendigo still roams these woods." Elias had forced a laugh, telling himself it was nothing more than folklore meant to spook outsiders. But the man leaned closer, his breath reeking faintly of whiskey. "It's no story. It's a curse. The hunger out here, if it gets into you, you won't be yourself anymore. You'll never be human again." Those words clung to Elias as he trekked deeper into the wilderness, chasing after the promise of untouched hunting grounds. By the time night fell, the forest had changed. The world became muffled under the weight of snow, and the temperature plummeted. Elias pitched his tent beneath a cluster of pine trees, the snow around them forming a natural wall. The fire crackled weakly, fighting to stay alive against the wind. That was when he heard it. At first it was faint, a subtle shift in the air, a suggestion of movement. Then came the sound, breathing, slow and deliberate, just behind him. Elias froze, every muscle tightening. He turned sharply, his eyes scanning the darkness between the trunks. But there was nothing, no movement, no shadow, just the silent army of trees standing in the moonlight. He told himself it was his imagination. Maybe the wind had caught in the branches. But then, the whisper came. It wasn't English. It wasn't French. It wasn't anything human. The sound was jagged, old, and heavy with a rhythm that felt wrong in his ears, like the forest itself had found a voice. The whisper floated between the trees, never too close, never too far, before dissolving into the night. Elias's pulse quickened. He forced himself to check the ground around his camp, and that's when he saw them. Footprints. They weren't his. The tracks stretched across the snow in long, impossibly wide strides. Each print was narrow and skeletal, with elongated toes that curled inward, ending in sharp, claw-like tips. No animal he knew left prints like that. And the size. Each foot was longer than his forearm. He followed them with his eyes until they disappeared into the deeper darkness of the forest. That was when the whisper came again, closer this time, carrying a tone he could almost understand. It wasn't just a sound, it was hunger. And it was calling him by name. The wind had died down, but the silence was worse. Elias lay in his tent, staring at the thin fabric as if it could protect him from whatever was out there. Sleep didn't come. Every few minutes he thought he heard something. Branches snapping, snow shifting, the faint scrape of claws on frozen ground. By the time dawn arrived, the fire had burned out, leaving only blackened ash. His breath hung in the air like a ghost. Elias packed up quickly, telling himself he'd keep moving. If he kept going deeper, maybe he'd find fresh game. Maybe he'd even forget the whispers. Hours later, the forest opened into a small clearing where a cabin stood, if it could still be called that. Its roof sagged under the weight of years, the wood gray and splintered. The windows were shattered, and the door hung crooked on rusted hinges. Snow had drifted inside, coating the floor in white. Elias stepped inside cautiously. The air was stale, thick with the faint scent of decay. Scratches ran deep across the walls, some high enough to make his stomach twist. No human could have reached that far up without a ladder. On a table, half buried under frost, he found a leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked, the pages stiff from damp and cold. He brushed away the snow and began to read. The handwriting was frantic, each entry more desperate than the last. It spoke of being lost, of the cold creeping into the bones, of hunger so sharp it became a constant ache. Then, halfway through, the words changed. The writer stopped talking about finding food and started talking about smelling it, about flesh, raw and fresh, calling to him in the night. The final entry was just one sentence, scrawled so hard the pen tore the paper. "It's in me now and I'm so hungry." Elias closed the book, his hands trembling. A sound outside made him freeze. Heavy footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving in a wide circle around the cabin. The smell hit him next. A thick, nauseating stench of rot, like meat left too long in the sun. His stomach twisted, not with disgust, but with something else. Something dangerous. Hunger, not the normal kind, not the hollow ache of an empty belly. This was sharper, darker, and it whispered to him in the same ancient voice he'd heard last night. He pressed himself against the wall, barely daring to breathe. Outside, the footsteps stopped. For a long, terrible moment, there was only silence. Then, the sound of claws dragging slowly across the wood. Elias clenched his jaw. Somewhere deep inside, a thought surfaced. It didn't feel like his own. You don't have to be afraid. You only have to feed. The forest seemed alive now, not with trees or snow, but with eyes, countless, unseen, watching him. Elias stumbled through the deep drifts, the journal clutched in his hands, his breath coming in ragged gasps that steamed in the frigid air. The whispers had returned, louder now, sharper, like ice against his skull. Feed. You must feed. He spun around, but there was no one. Only the endless black pines stretching toward the moon, their shadows like grasping fingers. His stomach churned. Not from cold, not from hunger in the normal sense. It was something else. Something foreign. Primal. A gnawing craving that clawed at his mind. He ran blindly, his boots breaking through crusted snow, until he saw it. A tall, impossibly thin figure standing in the clearing ahead. Its skin was pale as death, stretched taut over bones that seemed almost too long for its body. Its eyes glowed faintly, a sickly yellow, reflecting the moonlight like predator lamps. Its fingers ended in sharp, blackened claws. Elias froze. The Wendigo. Elias tried to scream, but the sound caught in his throat. The creature moved with impossible speed, gliding over the snow without leaving a mark, closing the distance in a heartbeat. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like lead. You are one of us now. The voice wasn't coming from the creature alone. It was inside his own head. Elias staggered, his mind fracturing under the weight of the hunger, under the lure of the thing in front of him. He looked down at his hands, and for a fleeting second, he thought they looked wrong. Longer, sharper, tinged with frostbite that wasn't frostbite. Desperation fueled him. He turned and bolted toward the trees, but the Wendigo was always just behind, its claws slicing the air, its breath smelling of rot and ice. Branches whipped his face. Snow blinded him, but he didn't stop. He tripped over a fallen log and fell hard, snow filling his mouth, and for a moment, he saw his reflection in a frozen pond. His eyes, they weren't his own anymore. Yellow, hollow, desperate. The whispers screamed louder, merging with the growls of the creature. Feed. 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 Before he could resist, his hands moved on their own. The journal slipped from his grasp, landing in the snow as he bit down on his own arm. Pain shot through him, but it was accompanied by a terrible, horrifying satisfaction. Panic and hunger collided inside him, tearing at his mind. He tried to stop, but he couldn't. The Wendigo circled him, watching, waiting, feeding the curse. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. The snow around him was churned and soaked, his breath ragged, his mind fraying. When the first light of dawn touched the treetops, all that remained was a single set of footprints leading deeper into the forest. They were long, skeletal, and human, and yet not human. The locals found the cabin empty weeks later. Only the journal remained, its pages smeared with frost and something darker. And sometimes, in the dead of night, the wind through the pines carried a whisper. We are always hungry, and we are always here. The legend of the Wendigo was no longer just a story. It had claimed another soul. And somewhere, deep in the frozen forest, Elias was still running, never stopping, never human, forever cursed.